Hi, folks. I hope you're doing well. One of my favorite books is Thinking Fast and Slow. And that book rightly won its author a Nobel Prize because it explored one of my favorite topics, a very fascinating topic, and something I touch on a lot, and that is human beings are not nearly as rational as they think they are. Human beings are very, very emotional, they're not objective. And like I said, they're not as rational as they think they are. In fact, one of the book's central observations is that our minds are constantly creating stories. And I've touched on this before, that if you want to learn anything or understand anything, the best way to do that is try and frame it as a story. Story is how human beings passed on knowledge before we created writing. And like I said, our brain is specifically designed to interpret the world and understand the world in a format that is built around stories. So, like I said, one of the book's central observations is that our minds are constantly creating stories about ourselves, stories about other people, stories about why things happen, stories about our future, what will happen next. And most of the times, the mistake that we do is that we mistake those stories for reality. The stories that are rolling around in our brains and that our brains tell us, we mistake them for reality. And if we don't understand that, it can lead to some very expensive mistakes because reality doesn't care what story you're telling yourself. Reality doesn't care what story you're telling yourself. That story is just your brain trying to help you cope with life. Um, it's your brain trying to help you frame the world. It's your brain trying to help you believe that the way that you are thinking, what you believe, the way that you're interpreting the world is correct. But it's just a story. And reality doesn't care what story you're telling yourself. The market doesn't care when it comes to investments. The customer doesn't care when it comes to your business. Your spouse doesn't care when it comes to your marriage. Your body doesn't care when it comes to your health. Reality does not care what story you're telling yourself. Reality only responds to what is true. And that's why you find that some people seem to consistently make better decisions than others. It's not necessarily that they're smarter or that they're better informed. What I have consistently found about good decision makers and what I'm constantly trying to improve in myself and a skill that I'm constantly trying to develop is that you need to be willing to confront uncomfortable facts. I constantly say this to my wife and friends that we're adults now, and part of being an adult is having the capacity to have uncomfortable conversations because they are necessary, but it doesn't have to have malice. I think a lot of people walk away or never have the uncomfortable confrontations or conversations because they feel it'll be interpreted as malice. But I firmly believe a big part of being an adult is having the capacity to confront uncomfortable facts and having the conversation and dealing with reality as opposed to accepting the story that your brain is telling yourself so that you can cope, and more importantly, so that you can always be the hero in your story. Because the sad reality is that most people don't want the truth. They don't. They say they do, but they don't want the truth. Most people want reassurance. And I see this constantly in my job. A lot of clients come to me not looking for good financial advice. They've already made the decision, whether good or bad, and then they come to me wanting me to help them justify the decision. They've made the decision, and their brain has helped them develop a story that says, oh no, this was the right thing to do. Then they come to me to rubber stamp that decision because they don't want the truth. They want reassurance. They want confirmation that they're right, confirmation that the plan will work or is working, confirmation that the investment will recover, confirmation that the relationship is healthy, confirmation that everything will be okay. But reality is not obligated to comfort you. Reality is not obligated to comfort you. It's only obligated to reveal itself. And it will. And that's when the bill arrives. The investor who ignored the warning signs, the entrepreneur who ignored customer feedback, the executive who ignored changing markets, the husband who ignored growing resentment. The pattern's always the same. The truth was there, the truth was available. It just wasn't emotionally convenient because most people don't want the truth. They want reassurance. Charlie Munger, a person that I've referenced more than once in my past videos, a great man, great investor, great thinker. He always used to say that I never allow myself to have an opinion on anything that I don't know the other side's argument better than they do. And that's an extraordinary standard because it forces you to ask a question that most people go through life avoiding to their own detriment. And that question is, what if I'm wrong? What if I'm wrong? What if I'm the bad guy? And this is not an exercise in self-doubt or an exercise in blame or anything malicious like that. Constantly asking yourself, what if I'm wrong? And trying to see things from other people's perspective, whether you agree with that perspective or not, is an exercise in reality. Because how can you soundly defend an opinion or hold a position if you don't fully understand the other side of that coin? Asking yourself, what if I'm wrong, is not an exercise in self doubt. It's not a blaming exercise. It is an exercise in understanding reality. Because I can tell you now, every single bad decision that I've ever made started with certainty. I was certain I was right. It's when I'm certain that I'm right that my warning bells usually go off because I've tried to train myself in this to say, you're too certain in this. And every single bad decision that I've ever made started with certainty that I was right, certainty that the market will keep rising, certainty that the customer will stay, certainty that the spouse will tolerate it, certainty that I'll have more time to do what needs to be done. But reality has a habit of humbling certainty. And that's why I think one of the most valuable habits a person can ever develop is this: actively looking for information that contradicts your beliefs. Actively looking for information that contradicts your belief. Actively trying to understand reality, not actively trying to justify the story that you tell yourself. Not because you're weak or uncertain or stupid or unsure, but because you are a serious individual. You are a serious thinker. And serious thinkers understand that the goal is not to be right. The goal is to see reality clearly enough to make good decisions. The goal is not to be right. The goal is to see and understand reality clearly enough to make good decisions. Because sometimes a good decision is admitting that you're wrong. Understanding reality clearly enough to make good decisions is not the same thing as trying to prove that you're right. And sadly, far too many people spend their lives defending their opinions, where I feel it would be a better use of their time if they spent their lives updating their opinions, especially when new information comes into play. Which for me leads to a question I've been asking myself lately. It's the latest question in my journal. What truth am I currently avoiding because accepting it would require me to change? What truth am I currently avoiding because accepting it would require me to change, would require me to admit that I'm not